Hello everybody and welcome to Nathan on Shuffle. This is a very special episode. This kind of is kicking off my big year-end style shows for 2021, and it's going to be a big giant new music shuffle. Now, throughout the year I've done these shows called New Music Shuffle where I bring in a variety of different albums, usually about 3 to 4 albums, and do kind of quick shot reviews of each of them. Albums that I really enjoyed, that I liked a lot, but just didn't have time to give a full in-depth review on its own, but I wanted to recommend it and let you guys become aware of it because there's so much great new music out there. So there's certain albums that I totally adore and love, and that are by artists that are very personal and special to me, and they kind of get their own spot essentially of their own kind of album review. But part of the message of this channel is I want to share a variety of different music with everybody, things that, because I'm always listening to new music, always trying to discover the next best thing, and so this is a way to kind of bundle those together to recommend several albums at a time in a more bite-sized type format. And today I'm taking that to the extreme by talking about 30 different albums, and I'm putting actually a stop clock here to time myself so that I don't go way overboard on talking about these albums. I'm going to keep each review to a minute long, and I'm just going to basically give an impression of the music, like kind of in general what it sounds like, and a very brief description of what I felt about it before moving on to the next one. And so if something strikes you, go check it out. You know, there's definitely ways to check these albums out, either through the band's websites or their Bandcamp, or even through streaming services or on YouTube. There's definite ways to check these things out. There's so many great albums that come out. It's impossible to talk about all of them, and I just don't have the time to focus so much on all of these. So I listen to tons of music, but I have to really be selective about what I actually talk about in depth on the channel, because I only have so much time to record these videos. This is definitely a side project and hobby. I have my whole other career that takes a lot of my time and family time and all that stuff, as I'm sure many of you have the same kind of situation. So, but I do want to touch on a lot of these albums because I listened to them and I experienced a lot of great things from them and want to share them with you. And part of it is I've been hearing from you guys in the comments and in various posts. You guys have shared the albums that you have liked throughout the year, and when I hear about one that you guys talk about, I go off and listen to it, and oftentimes maybe it doesn't end up becoming a review just due to time constraints or just the way I'm feeling about it at the time, but I thought it'd be cool to kind of put these all together and give my general impressions of different albums that were either notable throughout the year that I never got to, or that you guys have recommended and I've listened to and wanted to give a quick idea of what it's about. So here we go. Let's get into it. You know, I don't have much time to waste here. It's going to be probably a little bit of a lengthy show, but like I said, I want to keep these reviews under a minute so that overall it's not like massively long, this big list. But this is kind of a catch-all of all the albums that really sparked my interest. And after this, I'm going to do a show about honorable mentions that are some of the albums, mostly that I have talked about in various capacities on the channel, that I really liked but didn't quite make my top tier list of best albums. And then, of course, at the end of the month, I'm going to be talking about the best albums for me of the year. So this is just kind of the start of that process. So let's get into it. Let's get into 30 different albums and talk about them. So hopefully you'll enjoy this. I think it should be fun. So let's see. So the first one, start the clock here. The first one is a band called Agusa. The album is In Annan Varld. Psychedelic space rock from Sweden. Really, it's only 2 tracks. They're 2 kind of epic length tracks that go through a lot of different movements and styles. It kind of reminds me of like Engelgard or something like that. Old kind of folky, old school symphonic prog elements, kind of Wobbler is another reference that kind of came to mind. These are totally instrumental pieces, but they evoke that kind of spirit like Genesis, Jethro Tull, Pink Floyd, all of those classic progressive artists and kind of this cool eclectic stew. And I just thought it was a really, really great album that has a lot of interesting instrumentation and a lot of interesting moments that really speak to that old school classic prog fan in my heart. So really well placed album and really recommended. So next, and by the way, these are in alphabetical order. I should have mentioned that at the start. These are all, I don't have any particular order, so I just kind of threw them in an alphabetical list. So next we have Antony Kalugin and the album Chameleon Shapeshifter. This is symphonic prog from the Ukraine. And this is a really interesting one because it's a solo artist. He usually does things under this project called Karfagen. Very symphonic, lush prog, but this is more of a solo album series, which started with Marshmallow Moondust and then continued with Stellar Gardener. And now this is kind of the third in this like little trilogy. And to me, this is really strong. I really love it. Really pleasant, dreamlike quality to it, kind of like Camel or lighter versions of Yes. There's some jazzier moments with some tasteful sax. Maybe sometimes it can get a bit like easy listening for me without a lot of bite to it, but I think it's really pleasant and fun for people who like that more laid-back style of prog, and I think he does an incredible job here. Really takes the reins here, and it's a great band. I think in his earlier pieces, it's more just him doing all the instrumentation, but here there's a little bit more of a backing band that brings new life to the project, so definitely a cool album there. Next we have Auri II. This is ethereal folk music from Finland, related in a way to Nightwish, which me and Jana have talked about quite a bit. So there's some shared DNA there, I know. But this is a really beautiful album. It's very ethereal and moody. Feels like it's coming from kind of an ancient place. Like you could hear this kind of music in a fantasy setting or in like kind of an ancient old school vibe, like, you know, Renaissance era or something. Just really heavenly vocals, so many beautiful moments. I love Troy Donackley, who's a big feature on this, on a lot of instrumentation. Just great soundscapes with his unique instruments. It's beautiful, otherworldly. There's some strings and a backing choir. Just a pretty sound overall that was really enjoyable to listen to and that I really, really liked. It's good to kind of chill out to, and I think it really marks a good path there and is well worth checking out. Next, we've got Azure, and the album is called Of Brine and Angels Beaks. This is heavy prog from the UK. Really what brought to mind listening to this one was the band Haken, because I feel like they have a similar kind of blend of heaviness, but some eclectic things in the mix, you know, different styles and things coming together. Chris Sampson is the vocalist, and his vocals kind of threw me off at first from enjoying the album fully. He has kind of this higher pitched voice, kind of like the lead singers of Coheed and Cambria or Mars Volta, which to me, you know, I could take in limited doses, but sometimes can be a little grating. But the more I listen to it, the more I understand how he fits into the sound of the group, brings a lot of character to these pieces. The lyrics are very like fantasy inspired, which I think fits the prog world very well. There's some big soaring moments, some quirkier sections, 80s inspired synths, some moments that almost sound like video game-esque soundtracks, big symphonic prog with a modern kind of indie quirky style. I think it's really interesting and well worth checking out. Next, we've got Bent Knee and their album Frosting, a crossover prog from the United States. Definitely tough to categorize them. I don't know if I'd call this prog in any sense of the word, but definitely a band that's near and dear to a lot of prog fans' hearts. This album was more difficult to get into. I definitely listened. I was really curious what it would sound like. And I loved the kind of opening single of Queer Gods when it came out, so I thought that was really cool, kind of a poppier vibe to it. But the album is really kind of a mixed bag for me. You know, some tracks work really well and are interesting. Some things are a little bit too avant-garde for me, a little too weird and strange. There's these kind of auto-tune vocals that kind of throw me off sometimes in parts of it. There's some darker, atmospheric, minimal sections. There's some like moments of this like sonic noise that's a little unpleasant to me. But there's moments of beauty in between all of this that are well worth checking out. And if you like the more diverse type of music like that, that's more eclectic and has a lot of different vibes to it, this could be for you. But it was a little bit of a tough listen, and I feel like it's kind of an acquired taste, but I really respect them as artists, so I had to mention it. The next album I wanted to mention is Black Midi and their album Cavalcade. This is Rio/Avant prog, I guess is what they call it here, from the UK. More of a modern act that kind of is gaining some popularity, but I think has a lot to enjoy from a prog audience. So it's pretty chaotic music. I'm reminded a bit of King Crimson at times, kind of like their period in the 80s almost. The opening track, John L., has like these kind of spoken word moments and then cacophonous sections between it. The second track is more of a languid crooner ballad style with some odd dissonance in the mix. There's some jazzy moments, there's some saxophone and jazzy guitar playing, there's some really off-kilter stuff in the mix as well, but I really respect the creativity here. I think they're really doing something different and eclectic and really embracing that progressive nature of the music. So definitely something to check out if you're into that more kind of fringe section of the prog realm. Definitely a cool one. The next one I want to talk about is a band called Cast and the album Vigesimus. This is symphonic prog from Mexico. They're kind of a band that's been around for quite a while. Sounds like they've been around about 40 years or so, so they're really stalwarts of the prog world at this point, and they made an incredibly lush, modern symphonic album here that sounds like it really could fit right in line with a lot of the more modern symphonic artists that we hear about. There's some really great, incredible instrumental sections that have a really beautiful sound palette with strings and great guitar work. There's echoes of Kansas, especially with some of those more violin-heavy moments. The vocals are a little bit over-the-top theatrical at moments for me. I prefer some of the more instrumental moments, but it's really a great album, and those instrumental moments are fire. They're just really great and explosive, and definitely worth checking out if you like this kind of style of symphonic prog, similar to like a Kansas, but also has touchstones of all of the classics of Yes and Genesis and all of those types of artists. So definitely well worth checking out. Next is a band called Confusion Field and their album Disconnection Complete. This is heavy prog from Finland. And this is kind of evocative of Riverside, heavier style music with some melancholy vocals. There's a touch of like kind of almost an 80s style in here, especially in the vocals. There's some great atmospheric synths and electronic sounds that give a great mood to the music, a great blend of heavier moments and atmospheric building, and even some pop sensibilities in the mix. So I thought this was really interesting and kind of spoke to that side of me that likes the Riverside, the atmospheric kind of Pink Floyd type feel, but with a darker, heavier side as well. I think it really blends those influences well and gives almost this 80s pop style sheen to some of the music as well. So I think it's an eclectic, cool blend of music that focuses on the heavier side of prog, but has a bit of that atmospheric spirit as well, like a Pink Floyd. So definitely check that one out. I think that's interesting, especially if you're a fan like I am of Riverside. Next, I've got an album from Drifting Sun called Forsaken Innocence. This is neo-prog, kind of a multinational group formed in England consisting of Frenchmen and Americans, apparently. So a really interesting group of musicians here coming together. This is a really good one. This is definitely one well worth your time if you like classic neo-prog style music, kind of like IQ and those types of bands. They really do a great style here. Some instrumental fireworks. There's once again some dramatic flavor to the vocal performance. Fun multi-layered keyboards with contrapuntal melodies throughout that give it a fun proggy flavor to the music, harkening back to the classics of the genre. Great hooks, strong vocal melodies throughout. There's a bit of a classical influence through a lot of the tracks, I felt like, but I really enjoyed this. Great high-energy neo-prog that just really brings the fireworks and has a lot to enjoy in the mix. I really thought this was cool and definitely well worth checking out. Next on my list is A Formal Horse and their album Meet Mallet. This is heavy prog from the UK. This is a really interesting album that really grows on me through time. I think it's really eclectic and fun. Kind of almost veers towards an alternative indie kind of vibe to me. The tracks are a bit shorter. It's like these little short prog-ish vignettes that each have their own unique flavor. Some are heavy and dark, like the song Heavy Hit. Some are light and folky, like Bring a Bun is kind of a lighter song. There's more indie pop kind of influenced songs like Hong Kong. It really kind of ranges throughout a lot of different things. So if you're looking for kind of an eclectic mix of stuff, I think this has a lot of different styles. I love the female vocals from Haley McDonnell. Kind of a cool welcome change from a lot of the male-led vocals of a lot of the other prog I listen to. There's a bit of a punk kind of vibe to this album to me. Like, if there's such a thing as prog punk, I think this would kind of qualify. So just an album with a lot of attitude and some humor, and it's really fun to listen to and breezes by, and is just it's a joy to experience. So definitely check out Meet Mallet by Formal Horse. Next, we have a bit of maybe a more obscure album that I came across that I thought was really fun. The band is called Fungi, and the album is Into the Void. It's alt metal / grunge prog, if that's a thing, from Mexico. It's hard to really qualify what this is exactly, because it does sound a bit more alternative rock in certain sections. It almost harkens back to some of the early grunge acts as well. But there's some heavy prog kind of influences similar to like a Rush or a Tool in the music. It's not overtly heavy and metal, but it does have a lot of heavier rocking sections with some great riffs. But it also knows when to take a step back from that stuff and focus more on the atmospheric sections, like a minute into the song Parallels and some of the more interlude tracks throughout it. There's some beautiful harmonies, a bit of a Riverside vibe once again with their pairing of heaviness and atmospheric music. It's an independent release that really deserves more attention. It's a very short album, but I think it's well worth your time. Really a fun one that I really enjoyed listening to that just got better for more listens. So definitely one to look up if you can. So next there is the Jane Getter Premonition, and the album is called Anomalia. Sorry about the pronunciation of some of these. I'm trying. This is eclectic prog from the US. And this is an album that was really growing on me as well, and has some interesting guests on it, like Adam Holzman, Randy McStein, Alex Skolnick. Just a really cool lineup of musicians. Jane Getter is kind of the main feature here, of course. This is her project, playing guitars, but there's a lot of interesting vocal moments as well. It keeps growing on me, that kind of modern alternative style with some jazzy leanings. There's some jazzy guitar sections. It reminds me a little bit of Steven Wilson and some of his latest work. Stuff like from Hand Cannot Erase and that kind of era of Steven Wilson. It has a bit of a darker vibe and atmosphere. I love Randy McStein, so his vocals are welcome on the track Dissembler. Really great playing by Jane Getter, just a fantastic guitar player with a very jazzy, bluesy kind of modern style that's really unique and fun. Just a really dynamic, great modern sounding album that I think could be really loved by all people that like the kind of music I do. So, all right, the next band on the list is Kerrs Pink and the album Presence of Life. This is prog folk from Norway. Definitely an interesting album that escaped my attention, even though it sounds like something like exactly up my lane. I love the band Magic Pie, which there's a lot of shared DNA between Magic Pie and this. They share a lead vocalist at least, so it has that same vocal stylings, but also has that same kind of bombastic symphonic style songs with a harder rocking edge that Magic Pie is known for. A lot of different flavors throughout. There's guitar and piano that can sound jazzy at times, some more classical inspired moments, but there's also that kind of folk leaning, especially in like the track Resurrection. In Discipline and With Love have some fantastic playing that showcase all these sounds within one piece. It's definitely right up my lane for my tastes in prog, where it has that symphonic bass line but has a lot of different styles that really create some variety and interest throughout the track list. So definitely a strong one to check out as well. I really enjoyed it. Next is Kristoffer Gildenlow and the album Let Me Be a Ghost. This is crossover prog from Sweden. Of course, this is former member of Pain of Salvation, was the bassist and is also brother to Daniel Gildenlow, who's kind of the leader of Pain of Salvation. And you can hear that kind of Pain of Salvation sound on this record. I don't think it's as heavy and as metal as Pain of Salvation tends to be, but it does have that kind of darker, more melancholy tone. He has a voice that kind of sounds similar to Daniel Gildenlow, so I can tell that they're related and have that kind of similar vibe. But this is a very haunting and beautiful album that's a little bit more minimalist than what you hear from like a Pain of Salvation or other bands of that ilk. Maybe it's more kind of in line with like the Lunatic Soul albums from Auri II, kind of more atmospheric and vibey and dark, without anything too intricate or proggy really in the makes. This isn't usually the kind of music I go to. I tend to like the more overblown proggy stuff. But it's sometimes nice to vary it up a bit with something a bit more laid back and atmospheric, and I think this really fits that bill. Another great release to pay attention to. Next, I've got the group Legacy Pilots and the album The Penrose Triangle. This is symphonic prog from Germany. The main artist here is Frank Us. Is kind of the brains behind the project and brings on a whole host of different musicians. Todd Zuckerman, Marco Miniman, Peter Wavis, John Mitchell, Jake Livgren, Eric Gillette is on this as well, Stephen Rothery. Just a whole host of different guests coming on board to this more... there's definitely a twinge of that symphonic prog style, but I feel like a lot of this lies in kind of the arena rock, AOR type style of the 80s, kind of like a Toto or a Styx is kind of the vibe I hear. But there's definitely progressive flavor in the mix as well. I love hearing Marco Miniman. I love John Mitchell singing on some tracks here. I love Eric Gillette giving kind of a great showcase on his guitar. It gives the album kind of an excitement and bite that it sorely needs in certain sections where it could feel a bit more... laid back and vibey in certain places and a little bit throwback, and could be a little bit dated in sections. But I think overall the good outweighs the bad, and it's really fun when these kind of more exciting sections pop up and give it a bit more bite and excitement. So definitely one worth checking out if you like those style artists. Definitely a cool one that I think's well worth your time. Next, I've got Luca Zabbini on his album One. This is crossover prog from Italy. This is the multi-instrumentalist of one of my favorite groups, Baroque Project, and this is his solo album, which is less progressive than, of course, the Baroque Project albums are. Not overtly proggy, but takes some influences from a variety of different styles. There's some classical, jazz, pop, even folk put into this mixing pot, and really gives a totally individual, unique listen to him and really showcases his talents as an artist. Really, it sounds like he wrote all these tracks mostly on just acoustic guitar, but really brought up different things in the arrangements to bring a bit more variety. There's like Hello has a very Billy Joel kind of sound to it, like something he would have written at the piano. Taking Time is a fun, poppy, almost Paul McCartney-esque song. Portrait is a ballad with a big classical piano influence. Then there's a more acoustic folk vibe from something like Constantine Cry. Just a varied, fresh record that I really enjoyed that really harkens back to a lot of different styles, and I thought was a lot of fun and definitely recommend. Next, I've got the Mastodon record Hushed and Grim, Tech Extreme Prog from US. Of course, they're from the Atlanta area, I believe. And this is a big, sprawling 2-disc set. It's really a lengthy album, 86 minutes long. More straightforward sludge metal that they're known for, but with a bit of prog tendencies that they've kind of become embraced by the prog community, I feel like, even though really they're more in the traditional metal vein. But they do provide a lot of interesting variation and interest in their musical style. The album's very dark, and it's focused on the passing of a close friend of the band, so that's why the subject matter is so dark. It's this big, sprawling epic of piece of music. It's hard for me because the vibe is so dark and so melancholy, and the album is so long that it's hard for me to get through the whole album. It can feel a little bit like a slog through certain sections because it's just so overwhelming and so much of an onslaught of this heaviness and darkness. But there's great songwriting, I can't deny, throughout the album. Some really complex arrangements and strong emotions being delivered by all of the band members, by the vocalists, and by the instruments. It's a really great showcase, and definitely I can see why so many people are high on this. I think it's a great album that deserves attention. Really cool. Next on my list is the band Molybaron, and their album The Mutiny, experimental post-metal from France. This is a really interesting record as well. It's they just signed recently to Inside Out, so they're kind of on a big label now, and getting some much deserved attention. Some pretty heavy progressive metal stuff here, almost veering towards kind of an alternative metal style, kind of like Alter Bridge. They have a really interesting lead vocalist that has a very distinct kind of accent and tinge to his voice, kind of this, I believe, kind of Irish flavor to it. And really, this makes me think of bands like maybe Carnival or even Tool. More of a hard rock, but with some proggy moments baked in. Really intelligent music that's really well crafted and can rock hard, but also has moments that are more melodic and catchy in the mix. So I think this is a really great record that deserves some attention. So I thought I'd mention it as part of this list here. Next is the band Monobody and the album Comma. This is jazz rock / fusion from the US. Melodic, complex, virtuosic jazz rock fusion is how I describe this. Just really great, excellent playing, beautiful jazz-tinged instrumental music, clear influences from artists like Pat Metheny and Chick Corea. Obviously, a bit of like kind of a math rock feel for sections, keeping the music very complex and interesting. Just a really beautiful album for fans of that kind of jazz fusion-y style. I think it's a short album, but it really packs a punch and really has some great playing on it. And this is kind of lesser known maybe, but it's just a style I really connect with, is this more jazz fusion type style. And this album I thought did it really expertly. So I thought it was definitely worth putting on this list as one to check out. Next, I've got Mostly Autumn and the album Graveyard Star. This is prog folk from the UK. Mostly Autumn are a pretty big band, very notable in the scene. I've heard a lot about them throughout my whole time of discovering progressive rock, ever since like earlier in the 2000s. They've been a big name, and they're just a band that never have really connected with me totally. I feel like their music can feel a bit slow-paced, and really I'm looking for something with a bit more of an edge to it, with a bit more of a rock flavor than what they deliver usually. So this is more of that nice folk tinge prog, more laid back, but there's beautiful vocals, some nice kind of Pink Floydian style guitar solos. There's even quite a bit of country influence on this that I was hearing. Some fiddle in the background. Definitely something I wasn't totally expecting, but the album overall is a bit sleepy for me, but I do agree that there's some beautiful moments that lift this up and make it well worth a listen. So really a cool, beautiful album that I really enjoyed, and even though it could be a little bit slow at times for my tastes. The next one up is a really interesting one that I heard. Needlepoint is the name of the band, and the album is Walking Up That Valley. This is crossover prog from Norway. This is more of kind of a throwback style. It almost sounds like it was plucked out of an older era. It sounds like it's more in line with like 60s psychedelia, some of that early Canterbury feel, even the way they recorded it. I think they were going for an album that sounded like it was made in that era. Retro psych prog folk is how I'd kind of describe it. There's some jazz influences in the mix that I kind of appreciate. Just really pleasant music, harkening back to a simpler time, back in that flower power late 60s era where music like this was more popular and accepted. It's a really well crafted listen. I think the band really did well here, and it's really an enjoyable laid back listen that I think is a lot of fun if you like that style of kind of 60s throwback. Another interesting one that's on my list here, Others by No One, and their album Book 2, Where Stories Come From. I've heard this one mentioned quite a few times. I think there's some people who really adore this album. This is kind of an extreme prog metal from the US. Very eclectic album. That's really the first thought that came to my mind. It goes through so many different styles, almost like turning on a dime from minute to minute. There's just so much going on. It's a bit overwhelming, in fact, to me. They can feel a bit folky and acoustic at moments. They could have classical influence in other moments. Then it'll swerve into some like intense heavy death metal style thing with growling vocals. But I appreciate the diversity of styles. I love stuff like that. But the heaviness was a bit much, and I felt like it switched around just too much. My head was kind of spinning, and I couldn't find something to nail down and ground myself as I was listening to this album. It's kind of like a mix between Deer Hunter and Between the Buried and Me, an interesting eclectic stew of different kinds of stuff going on in the mix. But as much as I enjoy and appreciate the diversity, it can be a little bit over the top for me, I think. But such great adventure and such great storytelling in the music, and I love all the different diverse styles that are coming to play here. So definitely a lot to enjoy and take in. And if you're a fan of that kind of more eclectic, wild kind of style of prog metal, this could be for you. So really interesting record that deserves mention for fans of this kind of music. Next, the album Silence from Signals by Paradox Twin. This is crossover prog from the UK. This is a really cool kind of laid-back style album. I mean, there's heavier moments at times, but I think overall it kind of more reminds me of a band like Anathema or Pineapple Thief, more of a laid-back style that can get moody and intense when it calls for it with the music. More of a modern alternative sound. There's kind of this style of bands that really are more in line with kind of this modern alternative kind of style, almost like Radiohead, I think, is in this lane, where there's proggy tendencies because the music is a little bit more complex than your average alternative indie rock style, but it's not really overtly proggy, recalling back to the Yes and the Genesis style. But this is just really great, well-written music with great male and female vocals, really great intelligent modern rock music with great melodies that stick with you, almost a poppy vibe in parts to certain tracks and certain sections. So really great makes too. It really sounds great and is pristine in quality. Really great instrumentation. So definitely a highlight worth checking out. So please check that one. Next is Pepe Deluxe. The album Phantom Cabinet Volume 1. This is a Helsinki-based electronic music kind of act. This is a really eclectic listen as well, kind of harkening back to what I was saying about Others by No One. This is not quite as crazy off the wall or even as heavy as that. This is more crazy and eclectic in more of a pop, indie pop kind of way. There's a blend of a lot of different styles here. I was kind of hearing some R&B, some electronica, some pop, even some jazz sections. Definitely an eclectic stew of different influences. Not really traditionally proggy. I don't think they would identify as a prog group, but because of their variety of different styles and sections that they display, I think it can be appreciated by a prog audience. Some great female vocals throughout the track. There's the really deep bass sounds that I really noticed and recognized throughout the tracks. It can be kind of theatrical in its style. It's kind of very playful and fun in that way. Some humor and fun kind of thrown in to give variety and excitement. And there's some really cool, catchy moments and some great experimental things. So definitely a cool band that's willing to throw out a lot of different styles and influences and really pushes the boundaries of pop music into something a lot more interesting than what you might just hear catching something on the radio, for example. Now we've got PFM, Premiata Forneria Marconi, and their latest album, I Dreamed of Electric Sheep. Of course, this is Italian progressive rock. Of course, a band from Italy, kind of a legendary prog group that have been around since the early days of prog, and this is their latest offering. And I was really surprised, when I first started this album, because I was expecting more of a slower kind of more laid back style from an older prog group, kind of like Yes Is the Quest sounds, but it kind of comes out the gate really hard and heavy, kind of almost like a Dream Theater inspired instrumental with Worlds Beyond. And then it kind of settles down into more of a light melodic space with a lot of poppier melodies throughout the mid section of the album. I think it really turns it up a notch towards the end when we get to Kindred Souls, which has some great features from Ian Anderson and Steve Hackett to bring kind of a prog quotient to it. And then the final two tracks are more instrumental, Transhumans and Transhumans Jam, really bring the prog fireworks again. So kind of a mixed bag. The middle can kind of drag a little bit and be a little bit less proggy and more pop-centric. But there are some great moments on it that I think are worth checking it out for. So if that sounds interesting to you, please check that one out. The next one on my list is the band Resistor and the album The Fifth Season. This is a group really spearheaded by Steve Unruh, who's kind of a big presence in a lot of prog groups. He does some stuff with Samurai of Prague and has done other things. I believe he's a big part of the United Progressive Fraternity, at least what they're planning. And this is a really cool project. Once again, is it overtly proggy? I don't know. It's kind of a harder edged prog with some interesting heavier guitars, but it has a very folky feel at times. It kind of goes between those two feels of these kind of harder edged guitars in sections, but then some laid back acoustic folky sections that kind of bring to mind almost like a Jethro Tull vibe, especially with some of the flute that is also on board. I love the violin and flute elements that bring that folky vibe. It's a really great, warm storyteller type album. Really isn't over the top proggy in any sense, but has little elements of it. I just think it's really beautiful. There's almost like a country bluegrass style to some of the tracks, but it keeps that consistent rock feel to it at all times. So something really beautiful that I really think is well worth checking out. Some great instrumental segments that really are well crafted, and I think it's a band that deserves some attention. And I kept forgetting to feature this because they're not really available on any streaming platforms. You kind of have to dig a bit deeper for their music, and so it kind of got a little bit lost in the shuffle. But really a great album that deserves some attention, and I think kind of slipped by the radar a little bit. Next is a pretty big one, and I talked about it a bit, I think, on a New Music Friday, but never did an official review of it, and that's Steve Hackett and his album Surrender of Silence. He actually released 2 albums this year, I believe, but this to me is the better one of the two. More of a heavier album, kind of really embracing more of that harder rock edge to his sound, which I thought was really cool and worked well for this project. And there's a lot of kind of world music feel to a lot of the tracks. Natalia brings kind of a more darker, Russian style vibe to the orchestration and sound. Wing Beats is more kind of this uplifting African-inspired number. Shanghai to Samarkand is kind of more of that Oriental kind of Asian-style sound, and Esperanza is a short Spanish-style guitar. So, but between those, there's some heavier-edged tracks. I love Devil's Cathedral, which introduces Nad Sylvan for a really cool number that's darker and has kind of a bit of a vibe with it, with some darker keyboard sounds and so forth. I think it's really cool, and I think overall it's a really fun record. It has a lot of variety and a lot of great playing on it, and I think it's well worth mentioning and should be heard by all fans of Steve Hackett. Next, I've got This Winter Machine and their album Kites. This is neo-prog from the UK. I believe this is a fairly recent release. But it's a fantastic one. This is one of my favorites of the ones I've been talking about. Great energetic neo-prog with a lot of great keyboards and soaring vocals. Has a great balance of kind of some heavier rocky moments, like in The Storm Part 1, balanced out with some lighter, more ballad feel type tracks that kind of are slow burners and kind of build up in anticipation and climax. Some great jazz-tinged guitar grooves in the song Limited. Pleasure and Purpose is a slow build that kind of builds up to a big moment. Really beautiful guitar and keyboard interplay going on. Some stunning guitar solos. Fun, heavy prog workout on Whirlpool with a Deep Purple-style organ. Broken is another ballad that's really beautiful with keyboards and vocals. Pete Jones has a focus on it. He does vocals on a track called Sometimes, and Kites ends the album with kind of a big bombastic feel to it. Sometimes it's neo-prog, sometimes it feels more in that classic AOR style lane. Sometimes there's even a folk or acoustic style edge to some of the more ballad-esque tracks, but it really is eclectic. It's fun. It really harkens back to that classic neo-prog style, and I think it's just really well crafted and sounds really great. So definitely a recommend for that one. Next is the band Trifecta and the album Fragments. This is jazz fusion from the UK, from some notable figures in the prog space, some musicians that have worked with Steven Wilson in the past, Nick Beggs on bass, Craig Blundell on the drums, and Adam Holzman on keyboards. And it's just fun instrumental jazz fusion with some Canterbury and funk influences. Every track is just impressive with some great playing. It's like these little short statements. Every track is relatively short, but they pack a punch and give you a lot of information in a short burst. I really think it's fun. It means no piece really overstays its welcome, and you move from track to track really fluidly, and I think it makes for a fun, varied listen. Brings to mind notable prog-related acts like Weather Report, Brand X, even some Frank Zappa or King Crimson. Sense of adventure and fun and playfulness keeps this a very light and fun listen that's easy to get lost in and just breezes past really quickly. So a really fun instrumental jazz album that I thought was really stand out. So next we've got the band Vola and their album Witness. This is progressive metal from Denmark, an album that I considered covering on a New Music Shuffle earlier on, but just didn't get around to. This is a heavy album, it's definitely in the progressive metal style, but I feel like what makes it interesting is it has some pop sensibilities with certain melodies and especially with a lot of the choruses that make it more accessible. It's strangely pleasant, in a way where you'd think it could get over the top aggressive and heavy, but because there's this pop sensibility and this kind of 80s style pop throwback, I think it kind of adds the variety it needs to make for a really creative, clever, pleasant listen. Really great balance to the music, even though the music is very dense and there's lots of big buildup of layers of sound that you can unpack. But amidst all of that, there's these catchy choruses that kind of stick with you and this kind of 80s throwback style that's really fun to listen to. Just some really fun and interesting varied music that I thought was really great and a highlight for this year. I really loved it. So definitely a great album to check out, I'd say. And then finally, the band The World is a Beautiful Place and I Am No Longer Afraid to Die and their album Illusory Walls. This is indie rock from the US, and this is a band that went on tour. They were the headliners and Bent Knee opened for them. I got it wrong on one of my early New Music Fridays where I thought this was the name of the tour. I didn't realize that this was a band's name, but I checked out their album and it was actually really cool. This is a great indie rock album that has some even proggy tendencies. It feels very modern and fresh, even though it isn't overtly proggy. There's definitely sections that are more adventurous and interesting. The last two tracks, in fact, are these lengthier epics that go through a lot of different styles and moods. I love the early tracks. I feel like the best parts of the album are the early tracks and the later tracks. In the middle, maybe it loses me a little bit. Maybe it's a bit overlong and could take a little bit of cutting, but I really love the big opener. Has a big anthemic style, and then Queen and Sophie for President has a great punchy rock feel that I really connected with. And the epics just go through a lot of different movements and feels and vibes. There's a mix of male and female vocals. There's some hypnotic kind of looping guitars used throughout that really define their style to me. And there's just a lot of moods, and they can be a little bit darker and more thoughtful. But there's also some moments of fun and uplifting moments and some great kind of orchestration that balances things out. Some big, almost like big strings and sections. So I thought this was really great and contains a lot of great variety and is just a great musical palette. So there you have it. That is 30 albums that I've just discussed. This was probably a bigger undertaking than I even realized. So hopefully you enjoyed it and it wasn't just like too much to take in, I guess. But it's kind of an experiment. We'll see how it works. Thank you guys so much for joining me. Hopefully you found something in this mixture that you could like. A lot of different styles and varieties here, so hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. Please subscribe if you haven't yet. I talk all about new music, and I'm trying hard to introduce people to some great new things that may have passed you by. Please give your thoughts in the comments to any of these albums I've talked about, or any that I may have missed that you would have expected me to talk about. I had a huge, massive list before I cut it down to this 30 of like at least 60 albums that I could have talked about. So I was trying to narrow it down, and maybe I should have narrowed it even further. But thank you guys so much. You guys are so great. I'm really thankful for your support and for you guys watching my videos and commenting and liking. It really means a lot to me. So I hope you guys are having fun. And there's a lot of great year-end style shows coming. This is kind of more the surface level stuff that doesn't quite hit me as hard necessarily, but I felt was worth mentioning and has a lot of good qualities to it. We'll get into some of my honorable mentions next week, and finally end with some of my favorite albums of the year. So thank you guys so much, and hopefully you'll join me in another video. Bye.